This podcast is produced by Concierge Medicine Today, LLC. All rights reserved. Concierge Medicine Today, or CMT, was founded in 2007 and serves as the industry's trade publication and annual medical conference organizer. Please note, the information shared on this podcast and across all CMT platforms is intended for general informational purposes only and may contain errors or omissions. Nothing in this podcast nor across CMT platforms constitutes medical, financial, legal, nor professional advice, and CMT is not liable for any inaccuracies. CMT encourages listeners to conduct their own research and consult trusted advisors before taking any action based on the content presented. No mention, interview, or link should be considered an endorsement. This content is primarily intended for a healthcare audience and may not apply to all listeners. Thanks for tuning in.
Well, good morning or good evening, Docpreneur Nation. You're listening to Concierge Medicine Today's Docpreneur Leadership Podcast. And today I want to talk to a good friend, and I think he's just a great guy. He's honest, he gives reputable and great feedback, and he's going to shoot you straight. I think he's just a true Midwesterner, which is probably why we hit it off. Justin Outslay, you're the founder of Cinnamon Hill Partners, and we're going to talk about helping doctors find a buyer for their practice and all that goes into that and more. So Justin, thanks for being our guest today.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure to be here. It's fun to be a frequent listener of the podcast and have a lot of great conversations with you and turn that into speaking with the audience. So my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So you do some work with Cinnamon Hill Partners. Tell us a little bit about Cinnamon Hill Partners and kind of what your day-to-day looks like in the healthcare space.
Sure. So Cinnamon Hill Partners is an investment vehicle. I am a financial buyer. And so I could, if folks kind of know where I'm leading, I'll use the term private equity, which is like bad word in
Oh no,
healthcare.
you're the bad word guy. Yes.
Totally understand that. We have a bit of a different approach to private equity, which maybe I can get into later. But I am a healthcare entrepreneur looking to, invest in a practice, but also dedicate my career to then operating and growing that practice. So I said a little different than private equity because I'm more of an entrepreneur. I have my investor hat on today. I want to put on an operating hat on soon and be growing a practice, partnering with physicians to help them grow, reach more patients, and grow a really successful practice. So that's what Cinnamon Hill Partners is all about. It's just myself. I am the entrepreneur that leads Cinnamon Hill. I have a group of investors behind the scenes that will help raise the capital, provide the money, and give us some expertise and insight of how to grow. But we are looking to acquire a practice.
And our goal today is to really inform doctors. It's not to sell them anything or sell you on them and them on you or whatever. We just feel as though education and being informed is so important because you want to build a practice that has a legacy in your community. You want to be known for something and known for serving your patients. And, let's deal with the mental stigma of why is private equity, have such a negative stereotype in the healthcare space.
Yeah, let me start with a tidbit. So my brother is a physician, come from a family of physicians. My mom and dad come from they're more entrepreneurial. They bought a business and ran that. But my brother's a physician, so a mix of business and healthcare in my family. And I told my brother what I'm doing as far as like looking to acquire a practice, and he's like, "Oh, that's interesting." And then I mentioned the word private equity. He's like, "Oh, private equity is the worst. They're ruining healthcare. They're so bad." And he's referencing all these, Wall Street Journal articles or articles that come across, physician blogs and whatnot, and showing data that private equity is just the worst for healthcare. And I told my brother, I'm like, well, that's kind of what I am. Like I'm a financial buyer. I'm kind of in that world. And he's like, oh no, but you're not going to do that. You're not going to, fire people unnecessarily and just, raise prices and just be a bad player. I'm like, well, there's good actors and there's bad actors in every industry. And certainly in private equity, we can all read about the bad players. And there's certainly data out there that some private equity backed healthcare groups have provided worse clinical care. Well, frankly, there's probably a lot of private equity players out there that are also doing a great job. First of all, buying practices from physicians who've built a great practice, so making sure they have a great outcome, and then are building a practice in all the best ways to make sure patients have the best experience possible. So I'm not here to, defend private equity. I don't think they need defending. And we're not necessarily exactly like private equity. But that's all to say that there's good actors, there's bad actors. It's important as a physician, if you're listening this and you're thinking about selling your practice, which I know has been a really hot topic of conversation about how to prepare for that. What are the types of buyers? Michael, these are all things that we can get into, but it's important to understand the landscape. And at the end of the day, private equity, just like being a physician, is a people-oriented business, and you got to connect with the right people that have the right mission in place.
Yeah. Well, and it is something that is important. And just like you mentioned in the news, yeah, those are the ones that make the news. And maybe there's a lot of data out there, pro and con. But at
Yeah,
the same time, call me naive. Yeah, there's bad companies, bad actors that do bad things. But I think that that's the minority versus the majority. And when we see organizations, especially in healthcare, truly be for we always say it's no longer about being the best doctor in the world, best private equity company in the world, whatever it might be. It's about being the best for your community and for the
yeah,
world. And so, you know, those dollars usually flow back into the practice or they flow back into the local community. Hey, we're going to upgrade software as a service. We're going to, add, another provider or whatever it might be. Those are the headlines that don't get the press.
yeah,
They're not going to get the eyeballs. And that's okay because, they are making a dent in the universe. So let's talk a little bit about the types of buyers out there who, doctors are thinking about retiring, legacy provision, and sometimes altruism kind of gets in the way where it's like, well, I was taught, Justin, to be everything for everybody at all times and wear that like it's a badge of honor. Oh, and by the way, I was also taught that I'm not supposed to make any money either. So, you
mhm,
know, but at the same time, like I've worked really hard for my local community, and I feel like I deserve, a good 20 more years, and I'll stay in the practice intermittently. I talked with one doctor the other day. He's like, I still work 3 weeks a month, more or less. He's like, and he's in his late 70s, 80s. So,
mhm.
what are
Yeah,
the types of buyers out there, and what should doctors be on the out for? More importantly, what should they kind of know? Like, that's not that's a red flag. That's a caution tale.
yeah. Well, let me hit your last point first, which is what should you look out for? What's caution tale? Um, no matter what type of buyer, um, make sure that they understand your business. And by your business, of course, I mean your practice, which is inherently a very people and relationship oriented thing. No matter what buyer is out there, it's very easy for buyers to look at an Excel spreadsheet and see, cash coming in the door and value your practice and try to be finance experts. But if they don't understand what you do every day, as far as seeing patients, building relationship with those patients, then that's a red flag, no matter which buyer that is. Fortunately for me, my brother's a physician, so I understand what you're going through. My parents were entrepreneurs, so I understand how difficult it is to run a business. But make sure, no matter what buyer, that they really understand the relational aspect of your business. With that
Yeah.
said, let's walk through the few different types of buyers. Um, I am from a search fund. That's what Cinnamon Hill Partners is, which is a little bit different than private equity, which is a lot different than a strategic buyer. Michael, feel free to interrupt. I don't want to just drone on
No,
about types of buyers.
you're good.
It's a strategic buyer would be like a local hospital system, local health system, an existing healthcare company, typically a much bigger player in the local market. Think that the local health system. There's a lot of advantages to a strategic buyer. First of all, they probably know your business very well because they currently operate a healthcare business. They might be able to continue to operate your business very efficiently because they're a big player, they have a lot of resources. But a downside of a strategic is if you're thinking about selling, is you're going to probably be a very small part of a much bigger business. Um, Is your staff necessary? Maybe, maybe not, because the strategic probably has a big staff and they probably could let all of your folks go. So that's certainly a consideration. Um, Again, there's pros and cons. They know you well, but do you want to be a small part of a much bigger organization? Probably most, if not all, the physicians that are listening came from a large healthcare organization right out of school, didn't like being employed. And that's why they started a direct primary care or a concierge practice, is for those reasons.
Yeah.
Let's maybe go to the private equity side now, what I might call a financial buyer. The pros of a financial buyer is they probably have a lot of resources, capital, money behind the scenes because they want to invest in a practice and grow in that. So the good part about that is they'll might be willing to pay more than a strategic buyer because they have a lot of capital. Might not, but certainly they're going to invest in things like to help grow. So the IT infrastructure behind the scenes. That do we need to hire more people to continue to grow your practice? They also might look at the margin or how much cash is coming in, saying, do we need all of the staff? Not sure. Maybe we could trim some of the staff and really just drive up the efficiency. When you talk about the bad things about private equity, this is maybe where we're getting into, which we need to be as efficient as possible to really increase as much cash as we can possibly get. Um, and this legacy part that I've talked about, Michael, as far as like you becoming just one part of that organization and a strategic buyer for a private equity buyer, you're probably going to be one company within a big portfolio of many, many more companies. So again, your legacy here, the practice you've built, isn't all that important to a private equity buyer. Pros and
Yeah.
cons again. For search funds, Cinnamon Hill Partners, which I founded, is a search fund. We are a type of private equity, but as I talked about up front, like I am the entrepreneur here. I'm dedicating my career, moving my family to the location of your practice to help grow. We certainly have the capital, the money to invest in things like IT infrastructure, maybe boost marketing. We want to grow and we want to grow organically. We're not interested in coming to cut your staff. We want to grow, reach more patients to the point where we need to hire more. Um, so those are the three different types, Mike. I'm happy to dive into any of the specifics there. Hopefully that was a pretty objective and informative overview of the various types of buyers out there. Maybe circling
Well,
back to the beginning, make
yeah.
sure if it's a search fund, private equity, or strategic, they understand you, they understand the business that you're in, which is building relationship and taking great care of patients.
Well, and I think most people, most doctors are probably familiar with the first two. The
Yeah.
search fund, maybe not so much familiar with it, and it sounds a lot more appealing than the other two. Not to say that the other two don't have their pros, because again, they each have their pros and cons, and there's pros and cons to search funds too. So, talk to us. Is search funds something new? Is this kind of new in the innovative, private equity space, financial space, or is this something that's been around for a while? And I mean, how do doctors engage with that? And any red flags or cautionary tales that they should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, it is. It's certainly newer than private equity. It has been around actually for a few decades, but at a much smaller level, because there's not many entrepreneurs that decide to go out into buy an existing business rather than start one from scratch. It's kind of a unique form of entrepreneurship, typically centered around some of the top business schools in the world, like Chicago Booth, which is where I was from, Stanford, Harvard, other business schools where entrepreneurs connect with investors, and those investors are former executives. They built their own companies, and now all they do is invest in young entrepreneurs like myself. So there's a few of us out there in the search fund space, but much smaller, much more niche than the broader private equity community. Red flags, I would say. Maybe I was being too generous with not mentioning cons about search funds. I think the obvious con is like, do you like Justin? Because he's
Mhm.
dedicating his career to your practice. Do you believe in him? Does he have any expertise in the healthcare space? Does he have a solid mission? And maybe you and I, as the searcher, maybe you and I build a great relationship, and I would love to give my practice to Jeff, and he's the son I've never had. But maybe it's like, we don't really get along from a cultural standpoint, in which case, definitely not a fit. And it might not be a fit if the idea of a searcher coming in to dedicate themselves to your practice, maybe you'd prefer to have complete control, in which case the more distant private equity folks that maybe just, make sure that you're operating well and you hit your performance targets, which might be aggressive, but you want complete control over the future of your practice. A searcher might not be a good fit because they also want to come in and help and be on the business side of healthcare. And that's going to be a perfect fit for some physician owners that I talk to, and others are like, thanks, but no thanks, not a good fit.
My mind's going in so many different directions, and it's a good thing. Um, where do I even start as I wrote these down? Um, so when you say, okay, let's say I like this search fund individual, I'm thinking with the end in mind of,
Yeah.
usually when you review a contract, what's the first couple things you look at, the financial side and then the term and termination. So how long is typically a search fund individual or search fund organization involved? And what are my outs if this doesn't work out? I want this to be amicable for both parties. We're not getting into medical, legal, or accounting advice in this, but we're just kind of thinking with the end in mind. Like, if this doesn't work out, or you've scaled this up, and now you're just ready to go on to another specialty or another practice in another area, want to move your family across the country, whatever it might be, you know, our search funds individual, and how long do search fund individuals or organizations kind of stay is going to be a
Yeah.
lifelong thing, because I don't know if that's con or a pro at this point.
Mhm. Again, I think it matters about like fit. What makes the most sense for you? Maybe I'll start with private equity since that's the more well-known type, and I can compare and contrast. A typical private equity investment is 3 to 5 years, maybe 7 years. You might see some longer, but private equity is in the business of returning capital, returning money to their investors within a reasonable time frame, 3 to 5 to 7 years. For a search fund, because it's a young entrepreneur like myself, probably a recent graduate of a business school, probably in their 30s, they're young, hungry entrepreneurs that want to dedicate the next phase of their career to the business. There's certainly searchers out there that have bought a business in the mid 2000s and have been running it for 10, 15 years, and they love it and they want to keep doing it. There's some searchers that operate for less than that. I think the average investment for a searcher like myself is closer to 8 years on average. And most of the folks that were probably considering selling their practice, they might have anywhere from 3 to 5 years left, or maybe they're ready to retire sooner than later. Maybe that's something we can talk about too, just as far as how soon should you plan ahead. But for a search fund, we're young entrepreneurs wanting to spend the next decade of our life building a great business.
Who do you wish, physician owner operators, if you had a dream team of advisors, you're like, I could come in and really help you. Who do you wish physicians would have on their kind of board of advisors to help them go to the next level? The problem is a lot of them are very content where they are. I like how I'm doing things. But what's your thoughts?
Yeah. Um, Physicians certainly need a strong legal and probably accounting and finance team behind them. And I say this with being as humble as I can because my brother's a physician. I'm on the business side. And I'm fascinated when I meet MD, MBAs that have both the finance and MBA business and also can treat patients. Like that is just mind blowing to me. But I think business and healthcare, it's a delicate balance, but it's a much needed balance. And I can include lawyers in there as well, because we're talking about selling your practice and transactions and whatnot. For a physician who's preparing and thinking about selling your practice, which by the way, should be 2, 3, 4, 5 years before you're ready to retire, is really the time frame that you should be thinking and considering. You certainly need a strong lawyer who, I don't just mean, maybe your brother-in-law who does like injury law and whatnot, all those billboards that we see. I mean a lawyer who understands healthcare and understands transactions and selling, because there's a lot of intricacies from a legal perspective. And again, not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. I have my own legal team. You certainly need a strong lawyer. And maybe on the more business side, to help you prepare for selling your practice, is a strong accounting team, a strong accountant, so you can understand how much revenue is coming in the door and how much are you spending and what is the cash flow at the end of the day once all the expenses are done. You should have a really solid understanding of that, because that is exactly the value of your practice, is the future cash flows that come in from your business. So between a lawyer and a business accountant, you'll probably have a dream team ready and understand how much your practice is worth and what the future could look like for you and your team as well.
And I think that this is something, I'm glad we're talking about this. And our guest is Justin Outslay with Cinnamon Hill Partners, and he's the founder over there. We'll put the links in the show notes below, but it's cinnamon-hill.com. Let's talk a little bit about the pro tips or a guide to, maybe the top 3 tips to preparing to sell your practice. That's such an important thing that we get lost in the weeds and it's overwhelming. And then you think about your staff, and then, next thing you know, 5 years additional 5 years has gone by before you entertain the thought of getting out again. What are 3 things that they could do to prepare their practice for sale?
Yeah, I would say start early. Um, as I mentioned earlier, that means certainly a year in advance of the sale, but more realistically, 3 to 5 years left of your career. Maybe we could talk about just stories of just folks I've talked to in the last year, Michael, because I've seen, I don't want to say I've seen it all, but I've seen a lot. Some physicians that I speak with are in their early to mid 70s, and it's hard to run a private practice, whether that's insurance based or concierge direct primary care. It can be really hard. And physicians in their 70s, it was a tough phone call because they were almost begging, like, "We need help. We need help. I'm ready to retire tomorrow." And that's a very difficult conversation to have versus a physician who I've had conversations with, and they say, "I'm thinking about this. I have another 5 years left. What's your advice, Justin?" That's a great conversation because I can tell them, make sure you have a lawyer, make sure your finances are in order. Understand what cash is coming in the door, how much revenue do you have with patients. These are all things that you can start preparing now so that when you are ready to sell, you get the full value of your practice. And the full value of your practice is if the all the finances are in order and you as the physician still have some time left, whether it's 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years, you still have time to sell the practice and either continue to work or transition your patient panel to an incoming physician who you can train. That's what a buyer is willing to pay for, is a smooth transition. Um, if it's I'm ready to retire tomorrow, that makes it very difficult from a buyer's perspective to pay for a practice like that.
Yeah.
So I've mentioned accountants, I've mentioned lawyers, potentially a consultant that specializes in healthcare practice sales. From a financial side, just to maybe drill into this further, that means preparing your financial statements, profit and loss reports, inventory of your assets, and also what holes are in your practice. You know this better than anybody, but is your practice manager solid? Do you have everyone on your team from an admin perspective? Are you still doing some things yourself that maybe an administrator can handle? These are all things to really tighten down the hatches or screw in before you come to a buyer. Because if you can come to a buyer and say, practice is running efficiently, we are producing a lot of cash. A lot of cash is because we're very efficient, and I still have a few years left of my practice. That's when you can start to demand really the full value.
A lot of doctors have rose-colored glasses when it concerns the value of their practice and what they think it's worth, whether they're 6 months out, a year out. I like the idea of having that runway that you're talking about, having I've got 5 years to look ahead, but don't ignore the 5 years. Like do things incrementally, to get ready for that. Like you worked really hard to become a doctor. Like that took a lot of time, exiting and leaving and finishing well. Well, I want to do right by my patients. I just don't want to sell out to this and sell out to, whatever. You're you're too important not to finish well. Like you worked all these decades where you are in your local community,
Yeah.
like there's good people out there. So, but putting on the rose-colored glasses, a lot of doctors have these and they put them on and they think, well, I somebody told me it's worth this. And they didn't hardly look at any numbers. They just kind of, napkin figured their
Yeah.
things. And so, but I think the question more is what's wrong with concierge medicine? And it's a very different business model than direct primary care practices. But when you're evaluating and getting those things, and you've looked at the numbers over the last few years, you've talked with doctors and heard their stories, good and bad, you know, poke holes in those models, like poke holes in that. And it's like, why can't that exit and finish well, or can it exit and finish well? And what's it going to take for those doctors to finish and leave?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if the first mistake or thing to avoid when you're thinking about selling your practice is lack of planning, which we've talked at nauseum about, I think the second mistake was just having rose-colored glasses from a pricing perspective. Like, what is my practice worth? To reiterate your point, Michael, as a doctor, you are incredibly important and you are valuable. But the value of your practice is a little bit more of a math equation than it is how valuable you are as a physician and human being. You're valuable. But from a valuation perspective, this is, like I mentioned, a math equation. And what I mean by that is how much dollars are coming in the door versus how many dollars are you spending. Mike, you and I, when we talked a few months ago, you connect me with one of your good friends. The name doesn't come to mind right now, but he's worked with several physicians about understanding the valuation. And what he and I talked about is, okay, what is the right way to value a practice? It's the money that's coming in the door, how much you're spending, but that includes also what the physician is paying themselves, because that needs to be factored into the future value. And maybe if you would like to negotiate your salary, if you negotiate a higher salary moving forward, okay, that lowers the valuation. The practice isn't worth as much. Versus if you, okay, I'm happy with this salary, that means the valuation could go up. So it's just a math equation to be like more of a finance, look at a spreadsheet kind of a guy. I can give a story here, Michael. Probably stories
Please.
about real conversations that I've had over the last year might be the most helpful. I was talking with a concierge practice in a um, highly affluent part of the country that was charging more premium prices. And they were great physicians. They all came from, some Northeast-based hospitals, internal medicine, had long careers there, and were rock stars. So they were really excellent. And we were talking about selling their practice. They were ready to retire in the next 1 to 3 years. And we're asking what valuation could be. And the discussion started with, okay, well, if this is your salary moving forward, that means the cash flow, this is what the cash flow looks like. This is how much we think the practice is worth. And then it was like, well, we want to pay ourselves a lot more than that. That's not reasonable for us. Oh, okay. That means the value of the practice would be this. And it was like, well, that we are worth way more than that. Like our practice is worth more than that. And by the end of the conversation, the salary had tripled from our initial conversation, and the value of the practice had gone up. So we weren't moving in the right direction, and it was like, you know what, it doesn't seem like this is something you're ready for or have prepared for, and I'm not sure if there's trust building on either side. So thank you, good luck, not the
Mhm.
right time for us. And
Yeah.
that conversation didn't go very well. I think in hindsight, from my perspective, maybe I could have done a better job at just explaining how the math works as far as this is about cash flow, and negotiating your salary impacts the value of the business. But understand that from a buyer's perspective, it's more of a math equation, and they want you to continue to work or at least prepare for bringing in a future doctor. But your salary is an element of this math equation.
Yeah. Well, and it should be, I mean, we always talk about, a doctor's value is, very important, but at the same time, that this emotions become a part of this,
No doubt.
discussion. And, my wife is a math teacher and not, she's has nothing to do with healthcare, but at the same time, when she helps our family, which she does, make a lot of financial decisions, there's very little emotion to, because it's a math equation, and that is, I think, that is such an important element of squaring yourself up,
Yeah.
because I think that there is a little bit of a, well, I'm worth this and I should be paid more because I've been victimized my entire career, and now I'm trying to be rewarded for all of that victimization and that hard work. And I'm sure if you and I listen to their stories about how the healthcare system and others did them wrong, that we would give them a permission slip, be like, yeah, you get a hall pass. Like you can complain, you deserve it. Like that you were wronged and we're sorry about that. But at the end of the day, if you want somebody to buy your practice, here are your options. And where now in follow up to that, do you find that those conversations, usually go in that direction, or
No.
what are the other directions? But then if they go in that direction, what then happens 3 years, 5 years down the road? You find that they just kind of exit quietly and it's just like Kaiser Soze, from Usual Suspects years ago. It's like poof, he's gone. It's like
Yeah.
you don't think that they sold it. It's like all of that energy and motion and you left dollars on the table.
Yeah. Well, I shared, I don't know about horror story, but I shared maybe a negative story of a conversation that didn't go well because of rose-colored glasses and unrealistic expectations. A great story I can tell is I reached out to a physician of a concierge practice. He was nearing retirement. He had a full patient panel of over 300 patients and was getting to the point where that was too much. And so he stopped taking on new patients and has reduced his patient panel to around 150, and was thinking about just sending a letter to his patients saying goodbye. And I said, You're leaving us so much money on the table. This is exactly the situation where a financial buyer or a buyer coming in can say, I want to pay you for the value of the great practice that you have. And we hear you. You're ready to retire soon. After we pay you for the value of your practice, let's recruit another physician together to keep your patient panel engaged with the physician. So you're not just sending them a letter to say goodbye. And this conversation went much better because it was, here's okay, here's my salary then for the next 2 to 3 years. We're going to work together over the course of the next 12 months to recruit a physician that wants to take over the patient panel, that is really a tremendous job. We're going to do that together. And then at the end of the 1 or 2 years, we'll transition the patient panel over to him, and I'll be able to officially retire. And that was a great conversation because the alternative for this great physician was nothing at the end of the day, and the patients were going to be left in the cold. And it turned into, we're going to recruit another physician together. You're going to keep getting a salary moving forward. And by the way, here's a lot of cash right now today to pay you for the value of this moving
It's like
forward. So
mailbox
that,
money, I mean, that's such a great story. It came to such a great conclusion because it's easy to send out a letter and say, I'm out.
yeah,
But it takes a little bit of advice from a business perspective, advice from a financial perspective, and to say you're leaving dollars on the table and you have an opportunity here. But if you're not emotionally and mentally in a place where you can hear that advice, that's more of a problem, than anything. So that's such a wonderful example and a great story. So thank you for that. All right, two questions before we walk into our last two questions. So we have four questions really left. Um, Now, concierge medicine is very different in its business model, depending on who you talk to. But from my perspective, probably from your point of view as well, it's very different than direct primary care. Pros and cons of selling, valuating, preparing for sale, preparing to purchase a direct primary care practice.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of direct primary care, by the way. I've looked at concierge, of course, and I looked at direct primary care. They're very different. I can certainly give a buyer's perspective on this, and maybe now I'm speaking more to the direct primary care physicians that are out there. But where in concierge you'd want to grow, and as an investor, I'm thinking about how can we grow? That's where my mind is at. Concierge, it's maybe recruiting one concierge doctor at a time and marketing, increasing your marketing efforts and bringing on more patients. For direct primary care, I think the best way to really grow is to reach employers. And
Yeah.
it's fascinating how, depending on which state you're in the local environment, that could be easier or harder. I've seen some states like Texas where there's been direct primary care practices that have exploded in size because they started to reach out to employers, they started to reach out to municipalities. And the pitch to the employer municipality is we have a great team of direct primary care physicians, also a great team of nurse practitioners. And that's maybe another element of direct primary care is I think nurse practitioners probably need to play an important piece of that as well if we really want to scale,
Amen.
grow, reach more
Yep.
patients, because we all know how few primary care physicians are entering in residency. How can we really provide excellent primary care to a lot of folks? Nurse practitioners might need to play a role in that. I won't say more on that because I'm not a physician, but something to think about. Um, and you might be in a state where maybe there's big insurance companies that just kind of dominate the space, and it's hard for you to go to employers and reach out to employers. For the small direct primary care practices out there, scale, there's a benefit to scale. There's a benefit to being able to go to an employer and say, we have offices in all of your locations. We have like short wait lists, or you can see us next day. We're ready to start serving your employees tomorrow. And we can do that at a much cheaper price than insurance. Like that's a very easy selling point to an employer. But for the direct primary care folks, it's a different conversation because it's more about growing and scaling to reach more of the masses and do that primarily through employers, because marketing to individual folks can be really difficult. And growing one patient at a time is very difficult, versus one employer at a time can be how you really grow and reach more patients and start impacting thousands and thousands of patients rather than one at a time.
Absolutely. Now, the next question was related. It's somewhat related to both models, but also I think even in behavioral or other specialties that you're working with or talking to, the conversations you've had or about to have. Let's talk about performance targets. That
Mhm.
is usually like kind of the walls go up and it's like I treat patients. I don't do performance targets. Like that's another meeting with other people. Leave me out of that meeting. I don't want to be doing and talking about that because it just doesn't feel right as a doctor to talk
Yeah.
about performance targets. And I'll say this too. I was talking to a doctor in Texas, and he said, some years I have good years, some years I have not so great years. And he's in a membership model. And he said, the first couple of years, it wasn't working too well. And, I wasn't in marketing it with the right messaging and different things because I felt like marketing was something doctors just don't do. We don't advertise, and everything comes from word of mouth, and I just wasn't getting word of mouth, and there's a formula to that, similar to a math formula,
Hmm.
and he's like, I gave myself a $5 raise for a couple of years, even though I was losing money. And he's like, but I needed to know that I was encouraged. It was an internal encouragement. It was emotional, and that I needed to do this. But what type of performance targets do you insist upon, or what type of performance targets do you encourage when you're working with these practices, whether it's in a membership model or outside of a membership model? How do you overcome those challenges of saying, look, we got performance targets, and if you don't meet up with them, what are the consequences of those? Because you get penalized and they get penalized too, or at least some kind of penalty, right? Like, hey, we're not going to have a big staff party this this year.
Yeah, Michael, I think you're touching at just how business and medicine can be great partners together, which is you're a physician. I'm speaking to the audience now. Like you're a physician, you've grown your practice, you've built your practice, but there's so many things that are part of running your practice that are a challenge. And that's why a business person can come in that knows marketing quite well, that can do the finances, that can help you with the customer journey and following up with your patients. Like those are things that where business can come in and do well. Performance targets are part of that. This is where maybe going back and circling back to like be careful about which buyer you select. This should be a conversation with the potential buyer before you sign anything, before you agree to an offer. What is the future going to look like? I can share, of course, the buyer's perspective, which is as a owner of a business, I want to make sure my employees are operating efficiently, but sustainably. That doesn't mean pushing them to the limit month after month. That's not sustainable, especially when you're working with physicians, which are human beings and are the most important piece of this business. So that's more of a high level answer for you, Michael. I can maybe be a little bit more specific, but let's just say I'm looking at a concierge practice where some of the doctors work part-time and they have a patient panel, a smaller one of 150. And that's okay. If they like to maintain a small patient panel, work part-time, okay, that's something that you can negotiate right up front and talk about right up front and say this will be your salary. If
Well,
a patient or a physician has 315 patients and these are needy patients, they're busy, and that physician is full, like I can't take on any more. Okay, that should be part of the discussion of I have this patient panel, it's this size. I think I'm full. But there's probably a lot of physicians out there that have a patient panel of 240 that want to get to 300 as a target, as a goal in mind. And that's where the business folks should be able to help with marketing and bringing more patients in the door and helping sell your practice to bring more patients in. So I'm viewing this optimistically, where business and doctors work together on this to find what's the performance target that is right for us. But speaking to physicians who are thinking about selling their practice, that's going to be part of the discussion. You need to be prepared as like this is the performance target I feel comfortable with. And I'd like to either get there because I'm not there yet. Can you help me get there? Or I don't think I can see more than X many patients. I'd like to set my performance targets up front. Good conversation to have before you
yeah.
engage too far with a buyer.
For sure. They have to have a clear vision of the
Yeah,
future. And
yeah.
uncertainty is part of it, but at the same time, you got to the place you are. You got to the safe harbor that you're in because you chose to leave another harbor and sail those waters, so to speak, and got to the harbor that you're in. Now it's time to maybe exit the harbor and look at what is on the horizon for you, whether that's retirement, whether it's partnering with another doctor, whether it's creating some
Mhm.
performance measurements that you're actually excited about. You're like, I'd love to do that because there's incentive to do that. I can help more people. And you'll kind of get a kick out of this, and then we're going to end with our last two very quick questions. And you'll kind of find this interesting from a marketing and a business perspective. But I paralleled the other day in another interview the idea of marketing and customer service training amongst staff in
Hmm.
healthcare, traditional plan reimbursed, insurance, except Medicare, insurance, except insurance, et cetera. How much money are they spending annually per employee on customer service training, which is more or less patient relations, right? $200 to $500 per employee per year on average in a traditional plan reimbursed practice. In a hotel industry, for example, they're spending anywhere between $1,600 to $6,000 on, more or less customer relations. In a concierge medicine practice, they're spending anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 per employee per year on customer relations. So I love that we've had the conversation today with Justin of Cinnamon Hill Partners about the parallels between business and healthcare. Because if we want to be sustainable, as one concierge doctor said years ago from North Carolina, he said, if we want to be helping people for the long term, which we do as physicians, that's our mission and our vision. Then we have to, if we want to be in business and stay in business, we have to know about business. And Justin is
Hmm.
certainly a wealth of information. We'll put the links in the show notes below. Book that you would recommend doctors read that you're like, hey, this is the one I give away most. What book or title or two would you recommend that they pick up or put in their Audible library?
Oh gosh, great one. Uh, Can I mention your book, Michael, A
Oh,
Guide for
sure. You're always welcome
Concierge?
to.
Because I was fortunate to pick up a copy last year and then took a pen and read it cover to cover with highlights and whatnot to really understand the business of concierge medicine. So that's a great one. But I would say I've got one right next to me. I don't know if there's if you're just an audio listener, then I'll mention it. But my one of the best books I've read in the last few months is called Mindset by Carol Dweck, The New Psychology of Success, How We Can Learn to Fulfill Our Potential. I read it and I bought several copies for family and friends. I think it's absolutely foundational to certainly if you're an entrepreneur, building your own practice, running your own practice, being a physician. It is to have a growth mindset, which is when something bad happens, something negative happens, it's an opportunity to improve. It's an opportunity to get better. And maybe for a physician, that means a patient comes in the door and it's just really difficult to deal with, or maybe not the best. That's an opportunity for you as a physician. How can I be better? How can I serve my patient better? For me, on the business side, it's business didn't go well this week or this month. The customer got mad at me. Okay, how can I get better? Instead of taking a mindset of it's their fault, it's somebody else's fault, taking ownership of that and saying, okay, I want to grow, I want to improve. This is an opportunity to do that. So love it, great book. I listened to it and then bought like a physical copy that I could actually have for my library and would recommend for folks.
Awesome. Our final question for you, Justin. You can be however short as you would like, because I know we're on a time bump here. What do you want to be known for?
Mm, the tombstone question. Um, Well, I have a mission statement that I would think is probably just what I'm striving for each day and what I want to be known for. Um, and I'm upfront with it too. I think I've actually had a lot of positive comments from folks like, "Hey, we appreciate your authenticity that you have a mission statement." And that's to serve Jesus with faithfulness. A very religious person, but viewed if I'm serving others, I'm also serving Jesus well. It's to strive for excellence with persistence. That's my competitive spirit coming out to really be excellent at what I do. And it's to uplift others with kindness, and that's my heart to serve. And this in this capacity, buy a business, grow that business by reaching more people, reaching more patients. That's why I'm dedicating myself to being a healthcare entrepreneur. Is if I'm doing a great job every day, I'm uplifting others, and we can do it with kind heart, by the way, which is
Absolutely.
Michael certainly something that I see in you all the time. Just your content and who you are is a very kind-hearted person. So trying to emulate you more each day, but that's what I'd like to be known for.
Well, I'll give you my wife's cell phone number, and you can tell her all these and my dad and my mom be like, hey guys, somebody. It's always remember Goodwill Hunting when Matt Damon and Rob Williams are in the office. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. So. All right. Well, Justin, thank you for being our guest today. You've been such a wealth of education and information to help doctors. And so I wish you well as you pursue your endeavors and your entrepreneurial spirit and the vision that you have for doctors. As we say around here, it's no longer about being the best doctor in the world anymore. It's about being the best doctor for the world and for your patients and for your local community. Justin, thanks for being our guest today.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure was mine.